It is just before dawn on March 21st, 1967. The jungle of War Zone C lies dark and silent, about 90 kilometers northwest of Saigon. In a small clearing cut out of the trees, 450 American soldiers are starting another day, and most of them believe it will be an ordinary one. They are wrong. Hidden in the tree line all around them, 2,500 Viet Cong fighters are crouched in the dark, waiting for a signal. Their orders are simple. Wipe this clearing off the map and kill every man inside it. The enemy commander likes his odds. His soldiers outnumber the Americans more than 5 to 1. His regiment is one of the finest the Viet Cong have, a unit that has beaten South Vietnamese troops, ambushed American paratroopers, and overrun camps held by Green Berets. But there is one thing this commander does not know, and that missing piece is about to cost him almost everything. Sitting in the center of that clearing are 17 heavy guns and a quiet, plain-spoken lieutenant colonel named John Vessey. Before the sun is high in the sky, the ground around this small base will be carpeted with the bodies of the men sent to destroy it. This is the story of Firebase Gold, and why attacking it became one of the worst decisions the Viet Cong made in the entire war. To understand how a tiny outpost turned into a trap, you first have to understand the ground it was built on. War Zone C was Viet Cong country, plain and simple. It was a wild stretch of jungle in Tay Ninh province, pressed hard against the Cambodian border, and it hid something the American military badly wanted to find. Somewhere in that tangle of trees sat COSVN, the Central Office for South Vietnam. Think of it as the enemy headquarters, the command center that ran every communist military operation in the southern half of the country. American leaders believed that if they could find COSVN and destroy it, they could break the back of the war. So in February 1967, they launched the largest operation of the entire conflict and called it Operation Junction City. The scale of Junction City was enormous. More than 30,000 troops poured into War Zone C, 22 American infantry battalions, several South Vietnamese battalions, 17 artillery battalions, close to 3,000 air missions flown in support. It was a giant hammer, and it was swung with a single purpose, to smash the communist command and end the threat for good. But the swing of that hammer set off a chain of choices, and the very first choice belonged to the enemy. It would turn out to be a costly one. The smart move for the Viet Cong was obvious. They were masters at melting into the jungle, hiding, and waiting for a big American push to burn itself out. But the commander of communist forces in the south, a general named Nguyen Chi Thanh, did not want to hide. Thanh believed in standing and fighting. He was convinced his best units could beat the Americans in a straight, open battle. This put him at odds with a far more famous general, Vo Nguyen Giap, the man who had crushed the French years earlier at Dien Bien Phu. Giap warned that charging American firepower head-on was suicide. Thanh waved the warning away. Within weeks, he would prove Giap right in the cruelest way possible. On March 19, 1967, American helicopters began lowering soldiers into a clearing near an abandoned village called Suoi Tre. The job was to build a fire support base, a fortified platform where artillery could sit and protect troops sweeping the jungle nearby. They named it Fire Support Base Gold. 2 units came in to hold it. One was the 3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry, led by Lieutenant Colonel John Bender. The other was the 2nd Battalion, 77th Artillery, led by Lieutenant Colonel John Vessey. And the moment the first helicopters touched down, the enemy showed they had been waiting. As the helicopters settled onto the landing zone, the ground itself exploded. The Viet Cong had buried 5 heavy remote-controlled charges in the clearing and set them off by hand. 7 helicopters were damaged and Americans were hit. It was a blunt message. The enemy knew exactly where Firebase Gold was, they had known for a while, and they wanted it gone. Yet the Americans pressed on. Within hours, the base took shape. The crews dug gun pits, strung barbed wire, set up heavy machine guns, and carved foxholes around the edge. It looked like a textbook fire base. But this base held a secret, and that secret was the man standing at its center. John William Vessey Jr. was 44 years old. He was not loud, and he did not look like a movie hero. But he had been building his reputation since World War II, when he earned a battlefield commission in Italy at the brutal Anzio beachhead. He had started his army life as a private. One day, far in the future, he would advise a president on nuclear weapons. On this morning, though, he was simply an artillery officer with 17 guns and a base that was about to be tested as hard as any American position in the war. And the signs of that test were already piling up. The warning signs were there. They were just ignored, and not only by the Americans. Only 11 days earlier, on March 10th, the Viet Cong had attacked another American base nearby, called Prek Clock. That fight should have taught the enemy a hard lesson. At Prek Clock, American gun crews lowered their howitzers and fired straight into charging enemy infantry. Close to 200 Viet Cong were killed. Only a handful of Americans died. It was a clear preview of what big guns could do at short range against mass troops. Instead of taking the lesson, Than's forces regrouped and started planning something bigger. What they planned would dwarf Prek Clock. The signs kept coming. On March 20th, American patrols spotted enemy soldiers watching the base from the trees. That night, a listening post heard movement in the dark, low voices, and the faint metal clink of weapons being readied. By the early hours of March 21st, Firebase Gold was dangerously thin. One of its 2 infantry battalions, the 2nd Battalion, 12th Infantry, had marched out the day before on a search mission. They were now 4 kilometers away, deep in heavy bamboo. That left only about 300 riflemen plus the artillery crews to hold the base. At roughly 4:30 in the morning, an American ambush patrol radioed in. They reported enemy movement. Then their radio went silent. The men back at the base did not yet grasp how alone they were about to be. At 6:30 in the morning, the jungle erupted. More than 600 mortar rounds slammed into Firebase Gold in just the first minutes. The blasts walked across the perimeter, shredding sandbags, caving in bunkers, and killing men where they stood. And then the infantry came. Waves of Viet Cong soldiers burst from the eastern tree line, screaming and firing AK-47 rifles and rocket-propelled grenades. The heaviest blow landed on Company B on the east side of the base, while a smaller attack struck the west to keep the Americans from shifting their strength. The enemy had not come lightly. They carried rocket launchers by the dozen, light machine guns, thousands of rifles, and close to 2,000 grenades. They expected to swallow the base in a single rush. For a short, terrifying while, it looked like they would. By about 7 in the morning, barely 30 minutes into the fight, the enemy had torn into Company B's lines. Viet Cong soldiers were now inside the perimeter, fighting Americans hand to hand. High above, an Air Force pilot in a tiny spotter plane called in F-4 Phantom jets loaded with napalm. The jets dropped their fire dangerously close to American positions, burning enemy soldiers caught in the open. It helped. It was not enough. The Viet Cong kept coming, and Company B began running low on ammunition. The captain on the ground made a call so desperate it is hard to imagine giving it. And what happened after that call is the heart of this story. The captain asked for artillery to be fired directly onto his own position, because the enemy was already that close. In the center of the base, Lieutenant Colonel John Vessey moved to the gun line. The situation looked hopeless. Of his 17 howitzers, 14 had been damaged by enemy mortar fire. Vessey did not let that stop him. He moved among his crews under heavy fire, steadying them, organizing fast repairs, and getting guns back into the fight. Within minutes, all but 3 of his howitzers were working again. Then he gave the order that would earn him the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's second highest award for bravery. He told his crews to fire beehive rounds straight into the charging enemy. The beehive round was built for exactly this nightmare. Its real name was the M546 anti-personnel round, but everyone called it the beehive. In plain terms, it was a giant shotgun shell for a cannon. Packed inside each round were about 8,000 tiny steel darts called flechettes. When the shell went off, those darts spread out in a wide, deadly cone. Normally, a beehive round was fired with a timer, so it would burst in the air. But Vessey's crews had no time for careful settings. They switched off the timers, lowered their 105mm howitzers until the barrels were nearly level, and aimed straight at the men running toward them. And the enemy still did not understand what they had charged into. Picture 8,000 steel darts ripping out of a cannon barrel at nearly the speed of a rifle bullet. The crews fired at men 75 meters away, then 50 meters, sometimes as close as 15. That morning, Vessey's battalion fired around 40 beehive rounds. When the beehive ammunition ran out, the gunners did not stop. They switched to regular high-explosive shells and kept firing them flat and level, straight into the attacking waves. By the time the fight ended, the artillery crews had fired more than 2,000 rounds, much of it at point-blank range. American soldiers who lived through that day later described what the foxholes looked like afterward. They found enemy bodies stacked in layers, 3 and 4 deep, where the fléchettes had cut down rank after rank. It was a sight almost no one who saw it ever forgot. Vessey's official citation describes how he crossed the base again and again, with no regard for his own life, steadying his men and directing their fire. When the enemy broke through the perimeter, he personally helped lead counterattacks to win the ground back. Years later, the battle still weighed heavily on the men who fought it. One of the artillery officers who hauled thousands of rounds to the guns that morning later said the day was not something to celebrate. It was something to mourn, a time to remember the soldiers lost there and the ones lost in the years after. His words are a reminder that behind every number in this story is a person. But the people inside Firebase Gold were not safe yet, and their only hope was still fighting through the jungle to reach them. Help had been ordered almost the instant the attack began. At brigade headquarters, Colonel Marshall Garth got word that Firebase Gold was under assault and immediately sent every unit he could spare toward the sound of the guns. Reaching the base was the hard part. The 2nd Battalion, 12th Infantry, led by Lieutenant Colonel Joe Elliott, had marched 4 kilometers away the day before. When the call came, they turned around and pushed straight back through dense bamboo toward the battle. The Viet Cong had expected this. Enemy soldiers tried to block the trail. Snipers fired into the column. Mortar rounds dropped among the men. Elliott's soldiers kept moving anyway, treating their wounded as they marched and never stopping. In under 2 hours, they crossed 4 kilometers of hostile jungle while under fire. One veteran later said the message driving them forward was blunt. If they did not reach the base, hundreds of fellow Americans would die. Around 9 in the morning, the lead troops of the 2nd Battalion, 12th Infantry, broke out of the tree line at the southwest edge of the base and slammed into the enemy. It was a huge relief for the defenders, but it was not the blow that ended the battle. That blow was still 12 minutes away, and it was coming from a direction the Viet Cong had failed to guard. To the south, 2 more units had been struggling for nearly a full day to reach Firebase Gold. One was a mechanized infantry battalion riding armored personnel carriers. The other was an armor unit with M48 tanks. The thing standing in their way was a river. The Suoi Tre River blocked their path, with no bridge and no easy crossing. For long minutes, the tank crews could only listen to the battle on the radio, unable to do a thing. Then they solved the problem with pure improvising. They drove an armored personnel carrier down into the riverbed, sank it on purpose, and used the sunken vehicle as a ramp. One by one, the tanks rolled across. At about 12 minutes past 9, the armor came crashing out of the jungle from the southwest. 50 caliber machine guns blazed from the tanks and carriers. The tank cannons fired canister rounds, which worked much like the beehive, spraying clouds of steel balls across the open ground. The armor swept along the flanks of the Viet Cong assault, cutting down attackers and slamming the door on any escape. One American captain later compared it to the cavalry galloping in at the last second of an old western. He was not far off. By 9:30, the perimeter was sealed again. By a quarter to 12, the battle was over. The 272nd Regiment, one of the most respected units the communists had, lay shattered in the clearing. What the Americans found next told the full story. The aftermath was staggering. American troops counted 647 enemy bodies on the battlefield. Intelligence believed another 200 or more had been carried away. 7 prisoners were taken. The Americans gathered a small mountain of captured weapons, dozens of rocket launchers, dozens of machine guns, scores of rifles, tens of thousands of rounds of ammunition, and close to 2,000 grenades. American losses were 36 killed and 190 wounded. The ratio was lopsided almost beyond belief, more than 20 enemy dead for every American who fell. That afternoon, bulldozer tanks dug 2 large common graves. One veteran later remembered eating cold field rations with his feet hanging over the edge of one of them. Later that day, General William Westmoreland, the commander of all American forces in Vietnam, flew in by helicopter to walk the battlefield himself. What he saw confirmed everything he believed about how this war should be fought. Soon after, the units that held and relieved Firebase Gold received the Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism. But the citation and the body count, impressive as they were, only scratched the surface. To see why this battle mattered so much, you have to ask a sharper question. Why was attacking Firebase Gold not just a defeat, but a true disaster for the Viet Cong? Start with the simple tactics. The enemy badly misjudged what artillery could do up close. Their plan was to swarm the base, take it fast, and then ambush the rescue column on its way in. Instead, the 17 guns turned the clearing into a death trap, and the rescue column smashed through every roadblock the enemy set. Next, they ignored their own warning. Only 11 days earlier at Prek Clock, they had watched American howitzers shred a frontal assault. They attacked the same way anyway, and they got a worse result. And finally, they walked straight into the exact fight Westmoreland wanted. His whole strategy was built on luring the enemy into massed attacks against strong, fortified positions, where American firepower could pile up these crushing, one-sided results. Firebase Gold was the strategy working perfectly, but the deepest wound was one the body count never showed. The real cost was the kind of men who died at Suoi Tre. The 272nd Regiment was rebuilt after the battle, but not with the same soldiers. The original Southern Viet Cong fighters, the local men with family ties, village connections, and deep knowledge of the land, were largely gone. Their replacements were North Vietnamese regulars sent down from the north. All through 1967, battle after battle ground down these elite Southern units, and slowly the whole character of the war began to change. The communist movement in the South was losing the very people who knew the South best, and that loss pushed the war towards something far larger. Here is the final twist. The defeats at Firebase Gold and the other Junction City battles actually convinced General Tan that attacking American bases head-on was a dead end. His answer was to change the target completely. If the fire bases were too strong, then the move was to strike the cities instead. Within weeks of Suoi Tre, communist planners began shaping a massive, countrywide surprise attack. The world would come to know it as the Tet Offensive of early 1968, the assault that stunned America and changed the direction of the war. Than himself did not live to see it. He died in July 1967, officially of a heart attack. As for Lieutenant Colonel John Vessey, the quiet artillery officer at the center of Firebase Gold, he never stopped rising. He commanded a division. He served as Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, and in 1982, President Ronald Reagan named him the 10th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military post in the country. He remains the only man ever to climb from drafted private all the way to that office. When Reagan asked what made him right for the job, Vessey's answer was simple: 46 years of service, from private to 4-star general. The Firebase idea that proved so deadly at Suoi Tre would be copied thousands of times across Vietnam before the war ended. Each one carried the same silent message to the enemy: come and attack us, and we will destroy you. The Battle of Firebase Gold lasted less than 6 hours, but for the men who fought there, and for the long road that ran from this clearing all the way to the Tet Offensive, its echoes lasted far longer. On March 21st, 1967, the Viet Cong bet everything on overwhelming 450 Americans with sheer numbers. They had walked into a death trap of their own making, and it was a mistake they would never undo.